Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back together. Not to a grand battlefield or a glittering palace, but to a much quieter, more intimate, and far more terrifying place, a small, firelit room in a world before modern medicine. We're going to step into the shoes of a woman facing a choice that, for most of history, wasn't a choice at all. It's a story about the fragility of life, the weight of hope, and the incredible, often brutal, journey that had to be taken before the miracle of modern childbirth became commonplace. It's a heavy topic, so we'll walk through it gently. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps me continue to create these journeys for us to share. And as always, I'd love to see where you're re-listening from tonight. Drop your city and the current time in the comments below. It's a small way for us to feel connected in this vast, quiet night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's a Tuesday, or maybe a Thursday. The days bleed into one another, marked not by a calendar on the wall, but by the rhythm of the sun and the needs of the land. You are sitting on a low wooden stool in your home, which is really just one large room. The afternoon sun, thick and golden like honey, pours through the single, small window. It's your only source of light besides the hearth, and you treasure it. The glass is wavy and imperfect, distorting the view of the small herb garden outside into a wobbly, green and brown dreamscape. You watch the dust mites dance in the shaft of light, each a tiny, glittering world of its own. The air smells of wood smoke from the bank timbers in the hearth, the faint, sweet scent of dried lavender hanging from the rafters, and the earthy aroma of the packed dirt floor, which you swept this morning and sprinkled with fresh rushes. Your world is one of textures. The rough homespun wool of your dress against your skin, the splintery surface of the wooden table where a loaf of dark bread rests, the cool, smooth stone of the hearth. You let the warmth of the sun soak into your shoulders, a simple, profound comfort. This is the very essence of life for most people in this era. Historians call this the pre-industrial age, a dry term for a life lived entirely within the cycles of nature. Your home, a simple wattle and daub cottage, is the center of your universe. It's where you were born, where you sleep, where you cook, and where one day you will likely die. The very concept of privacy as we know it is a luxury you can't afford and might not even understand. Your life is an open book, read by your family and your village. That small window, the one letting in this beautiful light, it's a symbol of that life. In some parts of Europe, at different times, there was even a window tax. It sounds absurd, but governments would literally tax homeowners based on the number of windows their houses had. The logic, if you can call it that, was that only the wealthy could afford numerous, large windows, so it was a sort of property tax. The result was that poorer folk would often brick up their windows to avoid the tax, living in near total darkness to save a few precious coins. A tax on daylight itself. Yours is small and functional, a compromise between light and warmth, between openness and the cost of glass. You lean back, the wooden stool creaking a familiar complaint. You can hear the distant, rhythmic clang-clang of the blacksmith's hammer down the lane, a sound as constant and reassuring as a heartbeat. A.B. bumps lazily against the window pane, drawn to the warmth. Everything is as it should be. A perfect ordinary afternoon. But there's a quiet hum of change beneath the surface of this day, a secret that is yours and yours alone for now. A shift in your own body that you are only just beginning to understand. Historians and archaeologists can reconstruct the layout of your house. They can analyze the pollen found in the floor to know what rushes you used. But what they still endlessly debate is the inner landscape of your mind. Did you feel the same hopes and fears as we do? Was your concept of the future a grand, open vista of possibilities, or a narrow, well-trodden path, laid out by tradition, faith, and duty? Some argue that without widespread literacy, the ability to imagine a radically different life was limited. Others insist that the human heart, with its capacity for love, longing, and dread, is a historical constant. As you sit there, in that patch of sunlight, what are you dreaming of? A healthy winter, a good harvest, or something more? Something you don't even have the words for yet. The sun begins its slow descent, and the golden light shifts to a softer, rosier hue. The shadows in the corners of the room deepen, and the warmth on your back begins to fade. The ordinary day is ending, and a new, uncertain chapter of your life is about to begin. That quiet hum of change you felt in the afternoon sun was just a fleeting mood. It's a profound and seismic shift, beginning in the very core of your being. It's a secret you've been keeping for a few weeks now, a truth confirmed not by a doctor's proclamation, but by the ancient, infallible wisdom of your own body. Your monthly bleeding, a rhythm as reliable as the moon, has ceased. A new kind of weariness has settled deep in your bones, a fatigue that sleep doesn't quite erase. In the quiet of the morning, a wave of nausea rises, a gentle but firm reminder that your body is no longer solely your own. You are pregnant. In this world, those two words carry a weight we can barely comprehend today. They are a fusion of profound joy and paralyzing fear. On one hand, this is the fulfillment of your purpose. As a woman, your value in this society, in your husband's family, is intrinsically tied to your ability to produce heirs. A child, especially a son, is security. He is another pair of hands to work the land, a guarantee that you and your husband will be cared for in your old age, and a continuation of a bloodline that stretches back into the mists of time. To be barren is to be cursed, to be an object of pity and perhaps even scorn. So when you finally whisper the news to your husband one evening, after the stew has been eaten and the fire is burning low, his face breaks into a wide, proud grin. He pulls you close, his hands rough from his work, and you feel the pure, uncomplicated joy of it. The secret is shared, and for a moment, it's just a blessing. But as you lie awake that night, long after his breathing has deepened into sleep, the other side of the coin reveals itself. The blessing is also a gamble, a terrifying one. This is the single most dangerous thing a woman in your time will ever do. Every woman knows someone, a sister, a cousin, a childhood friend who went into the birthing room and never came out. The spectre of childbirth mortality is not a statistic, it's a collection of faces, of stories whispered from mother to daughter. You're not fighting a single identifiable enemy. You're facing a host of them: the child that won't turn, the bleeding that won't stop, the fever that burns you from the inside out. There is no emergency number to call, no sterile hospital wing waiting. There is only this room, a midwife, and prayer. You find yourself indulging in small, secret rituals, driven by the folk wisdom of your village. This is where we see the blend of pragmatism and superstition that govern daily life. For instance, there's a popular belief that what a pregnant woman craves, she must have, lest the baby be marked. An unsatisfied craving for strawberries might, they say, result in a red birthmark on the child's skin. It sounds quaint to us, but for you, it's a serious matter. One afternoon, you feel an intense, almost painful longing for the taste of wild honey, and you send your husband on a 2-hour trek to a man on the other side of the woods who keeps bees. This was just indulging a whim in your mind. It was a necessary act of protection for your unborn child. Historians are still trying to unravel the complex web of beliefs surrounding pregnancy in this era. Was it seen primarily as a natural biological process, not much different from that of the farm animals, or was it a deeply spiritual state, a time when a woman was considered closer to God, walking the thin line between life and death? The truth, as is often the case, is probably a messy combination of both. The church taught that the pain of childbirth was Eve's punishment, a sacred trial to be endured. Yet the day-to-day advice you receive from the village women is intensely practical, focusing on diet, posture, and herbal remedies. The academic debate that continues to this day is about the ownership of your own body. From a legal and social standpoint, your body, and the child within it, it is a vessel for carrying the next generation. But in the quiet community of women, at the well or by the river while washing clothes, the perspective is different. Here, your pregnancy is a shared female experience. They look at you with a mixture of congratulations and a deep, knowing empathy. They see not just a vessel, but a woman embarking on a perilous journey they themselves have taken. They offer advice not just for the health of the baby, but for your survival. This duality defines your existence. You are simultaneously a prized asset for your family's future and a woman facing a deeply personal and mortal risk, supported by a sisterhood forged in shared danger. The days turn into weeks, the weeks into months. Your belly swells a slow, undeniable announcement to the world. The secret is out, and the dice have been rolled. You are now walking a path from which there is no turning back, a path leading to a single, fateful day in this very room. The news of your pregnancy spreads through the village not like wildfire, but like the slow, steady rising of the river, natural, inevitable, and touching everyone. It's no longer a private matter between you and your husband. It's community business. Your growing belly is a public symbol of hope and continuity, and with that comes a constant, well-meaning barrage of advice, warnings, and old wives' tales. The hub of this information exchange is the communal hearth, the market square, or most often, the quiet domestic space where women gather to work. You're sitting with a group of older women, your fingers, though slightly swollen now, busy with a spindle, twisting raw wool into thread. The motion is automatic, a muscle memory passed down through generations. The air is filled with the soft whir of the spindles and the low murmur of conversation. This is your classroom. The women here are the keepers of an unwritten library of female knowledge. Their lessons are delivered as casual anecdotes and pointed remarks, woven into the fabric of the afternoon's gossip. One woman, Elspeth, whose face is a roadmap of wrinkles and whose knuckles are swollen with age, squints at your belly. "You're a carrying load, child," she declares, not unkindly. "It'll be a boy, you mark my words." Another woman nods in solemn agreement, adding, "And see how you've kept your looks if it were a girl. She'd have stole your beauty by now." You smile and nod, accepting the prediction. Whether you believe it or not is irrelevant to question. Their wisdom would be unthinkable. This folk diagnostics was the era's equivalent of an ultrasound, based on a mix of observation and pure superstition. For every woman who swore a low belly meant a boy, another would claim the opposite. The truth was whatever the most respected elder in the room said it was. But the conversation isn't all cheerful predictions. It inevitably drifts to the darker side of things. They speak in hushed tones, their eyes flicking towards you to gauge your reaction. They tell the story of Agnes from the next village over, who looked at her hair during her confinement and her child was born with a cleft lip. They whisper about Martha, whose baby was born with the cord wrapped around its neck because her husband had tied a knot in a rope while she was in labor. These stories are meant as cautionary tales, a curriculum of taboos. Don't step over a rope. Don't look at anything frightening or deformed. Don't let a grieving person enter your house. Your world becomes a landscape of invisible tripwires, each one a potential threat to your unborn child. And this is where we encounter a fascinating and rather strange piece of historical belief: the power of maternal impression. It was a widely held scientific and medical theory for centuries, not just folk belief. The idea was that a pregnant woman's strong emotions or sensory experiences could directly imprint upon the fetus. If a mother was frightened by a dog, the baby might have a dog-shaped birthmark or a fearful disposition, but it was a genuine attempt to explain birth defects in a world without genetics. It also placed an enormous psychological burden on women. If a child was born with any kind of abnormality, it was implicitly, and sometimes explicitly, blamed on a failure of the mother's emotional or moral self-control during pregnancy. The conversation turns to the practicalities of the birth itself. The women discuss the best herbs to brew for easing the pain: raspberry leaf, chamomile, blessed thistle. They argue about the most auspicious time for a child to be born. A child born at dawn is destined for a good life. One born at midnight might have the second sight. They tell you to prepare the birthing shirt, an old, soft linen shift that will be sacrificed to the process. There's a tangible sense of women closing rank, of creating a fortress of shared knowledge to protect you from the dangers ahead. Yet, even in this sanctuary of female wisdom, there are silences. There are stories they don't tell. They don't speak in detail about the births that went wrong. They don't describe the horror of a baby stuck in the birth canal, or the terrifying gush of blood that signals a life draining away. They hint at it with phrases like "she had a hard time of it," or "God called her home." It's a protective censorship. They are trying to arm you with knowledge without overwhelming you with the fear that could, according to their own beliefs, harm the baby. One of the great debates among historians of medicine and gender is whether this female-centric world of birthing knowledge was a source of genuine power for women, or simply a way of managing a fundamentally powerless situation. Were these midwives unwise women, respected practitioners in their own right, or were they merely the best of a bad set of options, destined to be replaced by the male-dominated medical profession? The answer is complex. In your moment, sitting in this room, these women are your only hope. Their knowledge, a blend of empirical observation and magical thinking, is the most advanced medicine available to you. As the afternoon light fades and you gather your spun thread, you feel both reassured and more anxious than ever. You've been given 100 rules to follow, 100 potential disasters to avoid. The path to motherhood, you realize, is not a straight one. It's a winding, treacherous lane full of shadows and whispers, and you can only walk it one careful step at a time, praying you don't stumble. The day finally comes when you need more than just the whispered advice of the village women. Your back aches with a low, persistent thrum, and your belly feels as tight as a drum. It's time to summon the official gatekeeper of birth, the midwife. In your village, she's known as Goody Clark, a woman in her late 50s with a stern face but surprisingly gentle hands. She isn't a figure of authority in the way the priest or the village elder is, but in the exclusively female domain of childbirth. Her word is law. She arrives at your cottage carrying a small, worn leather bag. She doesn't knock, she simply enters, her presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the room. The air, once thick with your private anxiety, now crackles with a sense of purpose. She brings with her the weight of hundreds of births, a living archive of every possible outcome. Her examination of you is practical and unsentimental. There's no sterile gown, no disposable gloves. She simply washes her hands in a basin of water your husband has drawn from the well, perhaps adding a splash of vinegar for cleansing, a primitive but common antiseptic practice. Her hands, though chapped and work-worn, are incredibly knowing. She presses on your belly, her brow furrowed in concentration, feeling the position of the baby. She nods slowly, head down. That's good. That's as it should be. The relief that floods through you at these simple words is immense. She asks you questions in a low, direct voice. When did the pain start? How far apart? She listens to your answers, her gaze sharp and assessing. She is diagnosing your progress not with machines or monitors, but with a wisdom that is part science, part intuition, honed over decades of practice. This is the very heart of pre-modern medicine. The midwife, or a seek-out use in more formal terms, was the primary health care provider for women. Her role was officially recognized, and in many places, she had to be licensed, often by the church. This license wasn't about medical qualification in our sense. It was primarily to ensure she was of good moral character and, crucially, that she would be willing and able to perform an emergency baptism if the baby was born in distress. The saving of the infant's soul was considered as important, if not more so, than the saving of its physical life. This dual role, part medical practitioner, part spiritual agent, defined her position in the community. She opens her leather bag, and you catch a glimpse of the tools of her trade. They are a world away from the gleaming steel of a modern delivery room. You see bundles of dried herbs, raspberry leaf to strengthen contractions, lavender to calm the nerves. There's a small bottle of oil, likely olive oil, for massage. You might see a spool of thick, clean linen thread for tying the umbilical cord. But what really catches your eye are the more intimidating objects. There might be a large, blunt hook. This is a crochet, a terrifying instrument used, in the most desperate of circumstances, to try and reposition a baby or, in the worst-case scenario, to dismember a deceased fetus to save the mother's life. You quickly look away. The presence of such a tool is a stark reminder of the brutal reality that lurks just beneath the surface of this natural process. One of the oddest items you might find in her bag is a sneeze endurer. This could be a small pouch of finely ground pepper or hellebore root. It sounds bizarre, but the medical theory of the time, inherited from the ancient Greeks, was based on the four humors. A stalled labor was seen as a kind of blockage, and a powerful, body-racking sneeze was believed to be able to jolt everything back into motion. It's a perfect example of how pre-modern medicine was a blend of astute observation. They knew a stalled labor was dangerous and deeply flawed theory, They thought a sneeze was the answer. She doesn't use any of these tools yet. For now, her methods are about patience and encouragement. She has you walk around the small cottage, leaning on your husband during the waves of pain. She rubs your back with that fragrant oil. She is a master of managing the environment, closing the shutters to create a dim, womb-like space, keeping the fire stoked for warmth. Historians continue to debate the efficacy and status of these traditional midwives. Were they skilled practitioners whose knowledge was unjustly suppressed and forgotten with the rise of male-dominated obstetrics, or were they, for all their experience, fundamentally limited by the lack of scientific understanding of anatomy, infection, and physiology? The consensus seems to be that they were brilliant within the confines of their knowledge. They were experts at guiding a normal, uncomplicated birth. Their hands-on, supportive approach is something modern midwifery is, in some ways, rediscovering. However, when faced with a genuine medical emergency, a hemorrhage, a breech birth that wouldn't turn, or an obstructed labor, their toolkit of herbs, massages, and prayers was tragically inadequate. As Goody Clark moves about the room, her calm demeanor a small anchor in the rising storm of your labor, you place all your trust in her rough, capable hands. You have to. On this room, on this day, she is the only doctor you will ever know. And her skills, her wisdom, and her luck are all that stand between you and the terrifying possibilities of the hours to come. The days leading up to the midwife's arrival have been a blur of quiet, focused activity. This period, the final stretch of your pregnancy, is governed by a powerful nesting instinct that seems to hum in your very bones. The entire household, which really just consists of you, your husband, and perhaps his mother living in a corner of the same room, shifts its rhythm to accommodate the impending event. It's a time of preparation, a mix of the intensely practical and the deeply superstitious, all aimed at creating a safe and auspicious space for the new life to enter. You find yourself cleaning with a strange, boundless energy. You scrub the single wooden table until the grain stands out, pale and clean. You beat the dust out of the rough wool blankets that serve as your bedding, hanging them in the crisp air until they smell of wind and sun. This isn't just about hygiene as we understand it, it's a ritual of purification. You are preparing a sacred space. Every unlocked door, every open drawer, every untied knot becomes a source of anxiety. Folk belief dictates that a smooth, easy birth requires a smooth, unobstructed environment. Your husband is tasked with unlatching every gate on your small plot of land and barreling the rainwater cask. It's a symbolic act of opening the way for the baby. The centerpiece of these preparations is the birthing corner. It's not a separate room, but a designated area within your single-room home, made private by hanging a heavy blanket or curtain from the rafters. This small, enclosed space will become the theater for the drama of birth. Inside, a low birthing stool might be placed. This isn't a guaranteed piece of furniture. Many women simply give birth kneeling, squatting, or half reclining on a pile of clean straw and old linens on the floor. The birthing stool, if you have one, is a prized object, often passed down through a family or borrowed from the midwife. It's typically a sturdy, three-legged, backless stool with a U-shaped cutout in the seat, designed to allow the midwife access while providing you with support. The bed, your normal sleeping place, is considered unsuitable for the birth itself. It's too high, too soft, and too valuable to be soiled. It's reserved for the lying-in period after the birth, a sanctified time of rest and recovery. For at least a month after a successful delivery, you will be confined to this bed, excused from all your normal duties. It's a custom that recognizes the immense physical toll of childbirth and the vulnerability of both mother and newborn to illness. Friends and neighbors will bring food, creating a safety net of community support. Right now, this future period of rest feels like a distant, longed-for shore. This is also a time of spiritual preparation. Your husband might make a small donation to the parish church, a candle lit for street. Margaret of Antioch, the patron saint of childbirth. Her story, in which she was swallowed by a dragon and then burst forth from its belly unharmed, made her the go-to saint for a safe delivery. You might wear a small amulet around your neck, perhaps a piece of eagle stone, a hollow nodule of ironstone containing a loose pebble. These stones would rattle when shaken, were believed to have protective properties during labor, a piece of ancient pre-Christian magic absorbed into the fabric of daily faith. One of the more peculiar preparations involves what's known as a girdle. These weren't fashion items, but long scrolls of parchment or fabric inscribed with prayers, magical symbols, and religious passages. They were meant to be literally wrapped around the laboring woman's belly. Some were incredibly elaborate, owned by wealthy families or monasteries and loaned out for a fee. The belief was that the sacred words would create a physical and spiritual barrier against the demons and evils that were thought to be especially attracted to the vulnerable space of birth. It was a kind of holy armor. Historians are fascinated by this blend of the sacred and the profane, the Christian and the pagan. Were people genuinely devout, or were they just hedging their bets? The academic debate often centers on the idea of religious syncretism, where official church doctrine and ancient folk beliefs merge into a new, hybrid system that makes sense in the context of daily life. The priest might tell you to pray, but your grandmother tells you to wear the eagle stone. In your mind, you do both. You are building a multi-layered defense system, using every spiritual and practical tool at your disposal. You are not just preparing a room, you are trying to manage fate itself. As the sun sets on the eve of your labor, the cottage is ready. The curtain is hung, a pile of old, soft rags is stacked in the corner, and a pot of water is ready to be heated on the hearth. The air is still and expectant. The world outside, with its blacksmiths and barking dogs, seems to fade away. Your universe has shrunk to the size of this small, prepared space. The storm is coming, and all you can do now is wait for the first gust of wind, the first clap of thunder, hoping that the shelter you've so carefully built will be strong enough to withstand it. It begins not as a storm, but as a quiet tide pulling at the shores of your body. You wake in the deep, pre-dawn blackness, not to a sharp pain, but to a dull, unfamiliar ache deep in your lower back. It's a feeling you've never had before, a heavy, rhythmic pressure that seems to emanate from your very bones. You lie still, listening to your husband's steady breathing beside you, trying to decide if this is real or just another phantom of late pregnancy. But then it comes again, a slow, deep clenching that makes you hold your breath. It lasts for less than a minute, then recedes, leaving you in the quiet stillness of the room. This is it. There's no doubt. You don't wake your husband yet. This is a private, internal moment, a silent conversation between you and your body. You swing your legs carefully over the side of the bed, the packed earth floor cool beneath your feet. The fire in the hearth is just a pile of glowing red embers, casting a faint, demonic light on the familiar shapes of your home. The world is asleep, and in this bubble of silence, you feel the contraction return, a little stronger this time, a little more insistent. You grip the edge of the wooden table, your knuckles white, and breathe through it. The early hours of labor are a strange dance of normalcy and heightened awareness. You find yourself performing ordinary tasks with a new, deliberate focus. You add a small log to the fire, coaxing the embers back to life. You ladle water from the bucket into the iron pot and hang it over the flame, knowing you will need it later. Each movement is punctuated by the rhythmic tightening in your belly. The pains are manageable, almost reassuring in their predictability. They are a sign that things are happening, that the great, mysterious machinery of birth has finally been set in motion. This is the first stage of labor, a process that medical science has now mapped with incredible precision, but which for you is a complete unknown. You have only the stories of other women to guide you, and those stories are often vague and contradictory. It felt like a bad stomachache, one woman told you. It was like my back was breaking, said another. You are navigating this new territory entirely by feel, trusting in an instinct you didn't know you possessed. One of the mainstream historical facts about this stage is the emphasis on keeping the laboring woman active. The midwife, Goody Clark, upon her arrival later that morning, would have approved of your movements. The idea of lying flat or the sick, not for a woman in labor, gravity was understood to be an ally. She would encourage you to walk, to sway, to lean against a wall or your husband. This intuitive understanding that an upright posture helps the baby descend is a piece of ancient wisdom that modern obstetrics has, after a period of favoring immobilization, come to embrace once more. As the sun finally begins to lighten the sky, casting a grey, watery light through the small window, you decide it's time. You gently shake your husband awake. He sits up, instantly alert, the sleep wiped from his face by a surge of adrenaline and concern. "Is it time?" he asks, his voice rough with sleep. You simply nod. The quiet intimacy of the past few hours is over. The process now becomes a shared one, the circle of involvement widening. He moves with a nervous energy, building up the fire, checking the supply of water, his practical tasks a way of managing his own helplessness. He is about to be relegated to the periphery, a worried spectator in a drama in which he has no active role. This is when you might partake in a strange but common rendition, the labor drink. This wasn't just a cup of herbal tea. Recipes varied, but they were often potent, and sometimes downright bizarre concoctions. A common ingredient was oil of swallows made by, well, boiling young swallows in oil. Another recipe might call for powdered deer liver or mixed with wine or ale. The idea was to create a slippery or explosive mixture that would help expel the baby. It sounds like pure magic, but there's a kernel of logic, however flawed. They were trying to create a purgative, something to stimulate the body's expel forces. Whether it actually worked is another matter entirely. Historians who study these recipes face a challenge. Are they evidence of a desperate, throw everything at the wall approach to a dangerous situation, or do they hint at a more complex pharmacological knowledge that we have lost? The consensus leans towards the former. While some herbs had genuine effects, many ingredients were based on sympathetic magic, the belief that an object with a desired quality to the body. You drink the warm, bitter brew your mother-in-law prepares for you. It does little more than warm your stomach. The pains are coming more frequently now, the tide turning into a steady, powerful surge. The sons of the village, a distant cock crowing, the rumble of a cart was filtered into the room. A normal day is beginning for everyone else, but for you, the world has shrunk to the space between one contraction and the next. The sun climbs higher in the sky, tracing its familiar arc, but inside your small cottage, time has lost all meaning. The world is no longer measured in hours, but in the relentless, rolling waves of contractions. The initial, almost gentle, rhythm of the early morning has intensified into a powerful, demanding force that consumes your entire being. The breaks between the waves grow shorter, the moments of peace more fleeting. You feel as if you are being carried by a current, pulled further and further from the shore of your old self. The birthing corner, once just a curtained off section of the room, has become your entire universe. Goody Clark, the midwife, is a constant, steady presence within it. She speaks to you in a low, calming monotone, her words a small, human sound against the overwhelming noise of your own body. Breathe, child. Breathe with it. Don't fight it. Let it do its work. Her advice is simple, primal. She wipes your brow with a cool, damp cloth. She offers you sips of water. Your husband and his mother are outside the curtain now. You can hear their muffled footsteps on the packed earth, the occasional scrape of a chair, a whispered exchange. They are close, yet a world away. This is a space for women only, a sacred and painful territory where men are not welcome. Your husband's role has been reduced to waiting, a state of anxious impotence that is its own kind of torment. As the day wears on, a new and unwelcome character enters the drama: exhaustion. You have been walking, swaying, and squatting for hours. Your muscles ache, your throat is dry, and a bone-deep weariness begins to set in. Yet, there is no rest. The contractions are a merciless driver, lashing you forward. The initial sense of purpose and progress begins to curdle into a desperate plea for it all to be over. This is the point where a normal labor can begin to show signs of trouble. This is the transition phase, the most intense and often the most psychologically challenging part of a natural birth. The pain reaches its peak, and for many women, a sense of panic or despair can set in. In our modern world, this is when medical support, pain relief, and reassurance are most crucial. In your world, there is only the midwife's encouragement and your own dwindling reserves of strength. And then something feels wrong. The relentless rhythm begins to falter. The powerful, productive contractions seem to weaken, to become less effective. The baby, which had seemed to be descending, feels like it has stopped. Hours pass. The afternoon sun that was once streaming through the window has now faded, and the room is sinking back into shadow, lit only by the flickering hearth and a single tallow candle that sputters and smokes. The optimistic, purposeful atmosphere of the morning has evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy blanket of concern. Gertie Clark's face, usually a mask of calm competence, is now etched with worry. She tries all the tricks of her raid. She makes you change positions again and again, from kneeling to squatting to leaning over the bed. She rubs your belly with stimulating oils. She even resorts to that ancient and peculiar remedy. She makes you sneeze, holding a pouch of ground herbs under your nose until you let out a series of body-racking explosions. But nothing changes. The baby will not move. This is obstructed labor. It's a terrifying, life-threatening complication where the baby, for any number of reasons, it's too large, it's in the wrong position, your pelvis is too narrow, cannot pass through the birth canal. Today, it is the primary indication for a cesarean section. In your time, it is a death sentence for both you and your child. A particularly strange and poignant belief of the era was that a difficult labor could be caused by a quarrel with God. It wasn't just a physical problem, it was a spiritual one. The midwife or a family member might gently ask you if you have any unconfessed sins weighing on your soul, any secret grudges or failings that are closing the womb. The proposed remedy was not medical but spiritual prayer, confession and repentance. Imagine this in your moment of greatest physical agony and terror. You are also being subjected to a moral and spiritual inquisition, forced to search your soul for a failing that could be responsible for your impending death. The historical debate here revolves around the psychological impact of such beliefs. Did this provide a framework of meaning, a way to make sense of a senseless tragedy, or was it an unbelievably cruel form of victim blaming, adding a crushing weight of guilt to an already unbearable physical burden? Academics specializing in the history of religion and medicine argue that physical and spiritual worlds were so intertwined that this line of reasoning felt entirely logical, not cruel. It was simply how the universe worked. The candle sputters, the fire pops. The silence between your now weak and dragged breaths is heavy and profound. Every person in the cottage knows, without saying it aloud, that the path of a natural birth has come to a dead end. The folk wisdom, the herbal remedies, the midwife's experienced hands, they have all failed. The night is stretching out before you, numb and without end, and hope, which had burned so brightly that morning, is now dwindling to a tiny fragile spark. The curtain separating the birthing corner from the rest of the room no longer feels like a boundary. The anxiety that was contained within your small space has seeped out, filling every corner of the cottage like a cold, creeping fog. The muffled sounds from beyond the blanket have ceased. There is only a tense, waiting silence, broken by your own ragged breaths and the low, worried murmurings between the midwife and your mother-in-law. Outside, in the main part of the room, your husband can no longer bear to sit still. He paces the packed earth floor, his heavy work boots tracing a path of desperate, repetitive motion from the hearth to the door and back again. The small room feels like a cage. He runs his hands through his hair, his face, illuminated by the flickering firelight, a mask of anguish. This is the ultimate test of pre-modern masculinity, the one expected to be strong and decisive. Yet in this situation, he is utterly, devastatingly powerless. He cannot help you. He is forbidden from entering the birthing space, and even if he could, what would he do? His knowledge is of the fields, of the weather, of the beasts in his barn. He knows how to birth a calf or a lamb, pulling and turning with a firm, practical strength. But this is different. This is his wife, his own flesh and blood, and the thought of applying that same animal husbandry to you is a horror he cannot contemplate. The helplessness is eating him alive. He steps outside into the cool night air, needing to escape the suffocating silence of the cottage. The moon is high and cold, bathing the sleeping village in a sterile silver light. The familiar shapes of the neighboring cottages are just dark lumps against the sky. From one of them, he can hear the faint sound of a crying baby, a sound that, just yesterday, would have filled him with hopeful anticipation. Tonight, it sounds like a taunt. He leans his head against the rough, cold wood of the cottage wall, the splinters pressing into his forehead. This is a moment where the entire social and spiritual structure of the village comes into play. His first instinct after the initial paralysis of fear is to seek another kind of help. He looks towards the small stone church at the edge of the village, its spiral dark finger pointing at the indifferent stars. Prayer is his only remaining tool. He has been praying all day, mouthing the words automatically, but now he prays with a raw, desperate fervor. Bargaining with a God who seems to have turned a deaf ear, he promises more candles, a larger tithe, the pilgrimage, anything, in exchange for your life, for the child's life. A fascinating unsaid detail from this period is the existence of specific prayers and saints for almost every conceivable childbirth complication. There was Street, Raymond non-natis, himself said to have been born by caesarean section from his deceased mother, who was invoked for a safe delivery. There was Street, Leonard of No Black, the patron saint of prisoners, who was also, strangely, called upon to release a trapped baby from the prison of the womb. Your husband would have known these names, these specific appeals as part of the common currency of his faith. His prayers were not just a vague plea for help, they were targeted, spiritual interventions, the only kind he knew how to perform. The debate among social historians is whether this intense religiosity was a source of genuine comfort or an amplifier of anxiety. Did the belief that God was intimately involved in the birthing process provide solace, a sense that one was not alone, or did it create a terrifying feedback loop where a complication was interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure, adding spiritual terror to physical agony for your husband, pacing under the moon? It is likely both. He clings to the hope of divine intervention while simultaneously being crushed by the fear that he, or you, has been found wanting. He sees a flicker of a lantern down the lane. It's the village elder, a man he has known his whole life, making his way to his door. The bad news, has traveled on the silent currents of the night. The midwife, seeing her own skills exhausted, has sent for him. The elder's arrival signifies a shift. The problem is no longer just a woman's issue. It has escalated into a community crisis that requires the wisdom and authority of the village leadership. Your husband meets him at the door, their faces grim in the lantern light. They speak in low, hushed tones. The elder asks the questions your husband has been dreading. How long has it been? Has the midwife tried everything? The conversation is brief, practical. The elder places an odd hand on your husband's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that offers little comfort. The time for waiting and praying is coming to an end. The time for a decision, a terrible, unthinkable decision, is approaching. The two men stand there for a moment, two dark silhouettes against the flickering light from the cottage. Their faces a portrait of collective human fear in the face of an unforgiving natural world. The oil in the lantern gutters, and the shadows around them deepen. Back in the suffocating warmth of the birthing corner, the midwife, Goody Clark, finally straightens up, her back cracking with the strain of the long hours spent bent over you. The dim candlelight etches deep lines of exhaustion and defeat onto her face. She has reached the absolute limit of her craft. The herbs have all been tried, the positions shifted, the prayers muttered. Your body, which she has been trying to coax and command for the better part of a day and a night, remains unresponsive. The life force within you, once a powerful, surging river, has dwindled to a shallow, stagnant pool. She makes a final, desperate attempt, one rooted in the oldest traditions of her practice. It is a non-surgical manual intervention, a closely guarded secret of the Midwives' Guild. She washes her hands again, this time with a grim sense of finality. She anoints her hand and arm with the last of the massage oil, making it as slick as possible. This procedure, known to medical historians as an internal version, is an incredibly risky maneuver where the midwife attempts to reach into the womb, grasp the baby's feet, and manually turn it to a deliverable position. You are barely conscious, floating in a great twilight of pain and exhaustion, but you are aware of this final violation. It is an act of sheer physical force, a battle waged within your own body. The midwife's focus is intense, her breath held, her entire being concentrated on the task. But it is hopeless. The baby is too large, or wedged too tightly. To apply more force would be to cause a catastrophic internal injury. After a few agonizing moments that stretch into an eternity, she withdraws her hand. She has failed. She looks at your mother-in-law, who has been a silent, weeping witness in the corner, and shakes her head. It's a small gesture, but it's a death knell. It is the official surrender. In the unwritten code of the village, this is the moment the midwife's authority ends. She has done all that a woman can do. What comes next belongs to the world of men, and to a different, more brutal kind of practice. This moment highlights the precarious and often tragic boundary of female medical practice in this era. Midwives were masters of the normal. They could handle minor complications with experience, but they were fundamentally non-interventionist in the surgical sense. The use of a knife, the shedding of blood for healing, was a line they did not cross. That territory belonged to an entirely different class of practitioner. A curious and little-known fact is that some midwives did possess and were trained to use certain destructive instruments, like the crochet, a sharp hook, or a cranio-celeste, an instrument to crush the skull. However, these were almost exclusively used when the midwife was certain the fetus had already died. Her primary duty then shifted from delivering a baby to saving the mother. It was a horrific, gut-wrenching procedure, a kind of internal butchery performed to remove the obstruction and give the mother a slim chance of survival. But, in your case, the midwife can likely still feel a faint, fluttering heartbeat. The baby is still alive, and so her hands are tied. She cannot use her most extreme tools. The historical debate here is fierce. Was this professional boundary self-imposed, a result of a female-centric, life-affirming ethic that refused to engage in bloody, surgical violence, or was it a boundary imposed upon them by the male-dominated guilds of surgeons and the church, which sought to limit the scope and power of female practitioners? Some feminist historians argue that midwives held a holistic view of birth that was philosophically opposed to the mechanistic, interventionist approach of the male surgeons. Other medical historians argue more pragmatically that midwives simply lacked the anatomical knowledge and surgical training to do anything else, and the professional lines were drawn to protect patients, however crudely, from unskilled hands. Goody Clark slowly packs her leather bag. The neat bundles of herbs seem mocking in their uselessness. The bottle of oil is empty. She has nothing left to offer. She will not leave your side. Her duty as a woman in her neighbor prevents that, but her role has now changed from practitioner to comforter, a witness to the inevitable. She pulls a stool to your bedside and takes your hand. Her touch is no longer diagnostic or commanding, but simply human, a small point of contact in your terrifying isolation. Outside the curtain, she speaks in a low, grim voice to your husband and the village elder. I can do no more. The child is wedged. It will not come. The words, stark and unadorned, hang in the air. They are the official declaration that nature has failed. The time for hope is over. The time for a different kind of solution, a solution that comes not with herbs and prayers but with cold, hard steel, has arrived. The midwife's declaration of failure hangs in the small room, a verdict that transforms the atmosphere from one of anxious hope to grim resignation. The village elder, his face a mask of solemn duty, nods slowly. The time for half measures and women's wisdom is over. He turns to your husband, who looks utterly broken, and says the words that everyone has been dreading. We must send for the barber, not a doctor, not a physician, the barber. In the meticulously stratified world of pre-modern medicine, these titles meant very different things. The physician was a university-educated gentleman. He studied the classical texts of Galen and Hippocrates. He diagnosed illness by examining urine, consulting astrological charts, and theorizing about the balance of the bodies for humors. He was a thinker, a scholar. He rarely, if ever, touched his patients. The physical work of healing, the messy, hands-on business of blood and tissue was considered beneath his station. That work fell to the barber surgeon. This was a tradesman, an apprentice-trained craftsman. His primary job, as the name suggests, was cutting hair and shaving beards. But his sharp razors and steady hands made him uniquely qualified for the other, bloodier side of his trade, bloodletting, pulling teeth, lancing boils, setting broken bones, and performing crude amputations. He was the man you went to for any procedure that involved cutting into the body. The iconic red and white striped barber pole is a direct relic of this dual profession, the red representing blood, the white representing bandages. So when the elder says, "Send for the barber," he is not suggesting you get a haircut. He is summoning the only person in the community licensed and equipped to perform a surgical intervention. His arrival signals that the situation has moved beyond the realm of nature and into the realm of cold, hard mechanics. It's a public admission that all hope for a natural, safe outcome is gone. A young boy, a neighbor's son, is dispatched into the night, running down the dark, muddy lane to the barber's house on the other side of the village. The wait for his return is excruciating. The silence in the cottage is broken only by the crackle of the fire and your own shallow, rattling breaths. Your husband sits with his head in his hands. Your mother-in-law weeps silently, her rosary beads clicking through her wrangling fingers. Every tick of the grandfather clock, if you were wealthy enough to earn one, would sound like a hammer blow. The arrival of the barber surgeon is a dramatic and terrifying moment. He is not a comforting figure like a modern doctor. He is a tradesman arriving to do a difficult, messy job. He bustles in, bringing the chill of the night air with him, his leather apron already stained with the marks of his varied profession. He is a man of practicality, not sentiment. His presence immediately eclipses that of the midwife. Her feminine, holistic authority wilts under his pragmatic, masculine energy. He is not here to coax nature, he is here to defy it with force. A fascinating and little-known aspect of this professional divide is the intense rivalry and snobbery that existed between the different classes of healers. University-trained physicians looked down on the barber surgeons as ignorant, brutish mechanics. The barber surgeons, in turn, often saw the physicians as pompous charlatans whose Latin prescriptions on humoral theories did nothing to actually help the patient. There were even separate guilds, the Barbers' Guild and the Surgeons' Guild, who were in constant, bitter competition over which procedures they were legally allowed to perform. This wasn't a coordinated healthcare system, it was a fractured, hierarchical marketplace of competing trade. The historical debate around this figure is complex. Was the barber surgeon a necessary, life-saving craftsman who, despite his lack of formal education, possessed practical skills that were genuinely effective, or butcher whose ingenious and brutal methods often did more harm than good? The truth is, he was both. For a dislocated shoulder or a surface wound, his skills could be invaluable, but when faced with the delicate, internal complexities of the human body, his limited anatomical knowledge and complete lack of understanding of germ theory made him of incredible, albeit unintentional, danger. His hands, which had likely just shaved a beard or pulled a tooth, were not washed to a surgical standard. His instruments were wiped clean, but not sterilized. Infection was not a risk, it was a near certainty. He approaches the birthing corner and pulls back the curtain, letting the cold air wash over you. He looks at you not as a woman, not as a person, but as a mechanical problem. His gaze is assessing, his face unreadable. He turns to the midwife and asks a few terse questions, his tone dismissing her lifetime of experience. He is in charge now. The gentle, female-led world of birth is over. The harsh, male-dominated world of surgery is about to begin, and his very presence is a confirmation that all hope for a gentle resolution has been extinguished. The barber surgeon stands over you, a hulking silhouette against the flickering firelight. He has pulled the curtain aside completely, dispelling the dim, private sanctuary the midwife had created. The room is now starkly lit, a stage set for a grim performance. He says nothing to you. You are no longer a participant in this process, you are the subject of it, an object to be assessed. He turns to your husband and the midwife, and begins his examination, speaking about you as if you weren't there. His hands, unlike the midwife's, are not gentle. They are firm, pragmatic, and chillingly impersonal. He presses on your abdomen, his touch efficient and diagnostic. He is not feeling for the life within you, he is mapping the obstruction, judging the angles, calculating the physical realities of the problem. It's the same way he might assess a badly set bone or a deep abscess. You feel a profound and terrifying sense of depersonalization. Your body, which has been the vessel of so much hope and pain, is now just a piece of faulty biological machinery. He performs his own internal examination, and it is rougher, more painful than the midwife's. He is a man accustomed to force, not finesse. When he withdraws his hand, he wipes it on a rag without a second thought and turns to your husband. His face is grim, his verdict delivered in a flat, emotional tone. The child is trapped. It will not be born in the natural way. He doesn't have to elaborate. Everyone in the room knows what this means. He then looks at you, his eyes meeting yours for the first time. There is no pity in his gaze, no empathy. There is only a cold, professional assessment of the odds. In his eyes, you are already gone. His focus has shifted. The primary patient in the room is no longer you, it is the unborn child. This shift in focus is central to understanding the horror of your situation. In an era with deep religious conviction and a dynastic obsession with lineage, the priorities were radically different from our own. Your life, as a woman who has failed in her primary biological function, is now radically expendable. The life of the child, however, represents two things of immense value: a soul to be saved and an heir to be secure. The soul was the primary concern of the church. An unbaptized infant, according to the theology of the time, could not enter heaven. It would be condemned to limbo, a state of eternal separation from God. This was considered a spiritual catastrophe of the highest order. Therefore, if a choice had to be made, saving the child for even a few minutes long enough for a priest or midwife to pour water on its head and say the holy words was an absolute moral imperative, your eternal rest was already presumed to be secure through your faith, and last rites the baby's was in jeopardy. The heir was the primary concern of your family. In a world without social safety nets, a male child was a family's future. He would inherit the land, carry on the family name, and provide for his parents in their old age. The loss of an heir was an economic and social disaster. Your husband, as much as he may love you, is also under immense pressure from his family and the community to secure his lineage. This brings us to a chillingly practical and rather morbid piece of historical trivia: the existence of special baptismal syringes. These were long, thin metal syringes designed for a single, specific purpose: to inject holy water into the womb to baptize a child who was trapped and presumed to be dying during labor. This practice highlights the almost unbelievable lengths to which people would go to save a soul, even when the body was beyond all hope. Last-ditch effort to snatch a soul back from the brink, performed on a still-living, conscious woman. The historical debate here is a difficult one. Did the people involved, the husband, the priest, the surgeon, really see this as a necessary act of faith and duty, or was there a cynical calculus at play, sacrificing the woman for the sake of patriarchal lineage? Most historians argue against deliberate cruelty. They suggest that within the framework of their worldview, this was a tragic but logical and even righteous course of action. They were acting to save a soul from what they believed to be eternal damnation, and to prevent the collapse of a family line. The modern concept of individual bodily autonomy was simply non-existent. Your body was not your own, it belonged to God and to your husband's family. The barber surgeon's cold gaze sweeps from you to your husband, then to the elder and the priest, who has now been summoned and is standing quietly in the shadows. The surgeon is not asking for permission, he is stating the facts of the case. He is laying out the options, though everyone knows there is only one path forward. He has seen this scene play out before. It is a grim, familiar ritual. His ice-cold stare is the look of a man who has already accepted the inevitable outcome and is simply waiting for the other actors in the play to catch up. He is not the one who will make the decision. He is just the instrument. The choice and the guilt will fall on your husband. The barber surgeon's words fall into the silence of the room, heavy and final. The child is trapped. The unspoken implication hangs in the air, thick and suffocating. You lie on the low bed, a passive observer to a debate about your own life and death. You are so weakened by the long hours of labor that you can barely lift your head. The world seems to be happening at a distance, the voices of the men in the room muffled as if coming from underwater, but you understand. Oh, you understand completely. The decision is not presented as a choice between you and the baby. That is a modern framing. In your world, the choice is framed differently, more cruelly. It is a choice between two inevitable deaths, yours and the baby's, together, after hours more of futile agony, or one death and one sliver of hope. Your death is now seen as a certainty either way. The only remaining variable is the child. Can its soul be saved? Can its body be rescued from the prison of your fading one? This is the terrible calculus of pre-modern obstetrics. The men your husband, the village elder, the priest, and the barber surgeon have now formed a grim little council at the far end of the room, near the hearth. Their dark shapes are huddled together, their voices a low, conspiratorial rumble. They are not asking for your opinion. Your role in this has ended. You are the subject of the meeting, not a member of it. Your husband is the one at the center of the storm. He stands there, a simple farmer or craftsman, utterly out of his depth, forced to make a decision that feels like something out of a Greek tragedy. His face is a battlefield of conflicting emotions. You can see the love he feels for you, the shared history in his eyes, the memory of ordinary days of laughter. But you can also see the immense weight of duty pressing down on him. The priest is murmuring in his ear, speaking of God's will, of the sacred duty to baptize, of the eternal fate of an innocent soul. The elder is speaking of lineage, of the family name, of the land that needs an heir. It's an overwhelming combination of spiritual and social pressure. This brings us to the very term serene section. Its origins are shrouded in myth and historical debate. The popular story is that it was named after Julius Caesar, who was supposedly born this way. Most historians now agree this is a myth. In Caesar's time, the procedure was only ever performed on a dead or dying woman, and Caesar's own mother, Aurelia, lived for many years after his birth. A more likely origin is the Roman law, the lex caesarea, which mandated that if a pregnant woman died, the child had to be cut from her womb in an attempt to save it. The name likely comes from the Latin verb caedere, to cut. So the very name of the procedure is rooted not in a story of miraculous birth, but in a law governing the handling of the dead. Another fascinating and deeply unsettling tidbit is the concept of the test of life. Before proceeding, it was sometimes considered necessary to prove the mother was truly beyond hope. This could involve horrific tests, like placing a hot coal or a drop of molten wax on her skin to see if she reacted, or holding a mirror to her lips to check for the faintest breath. In your case, you are still breathing, still conscious, which makes the decision even more monstrous. The procedure is not being done on a corpse, but on a living woman, with the full knowledge that the procedure itself will kill her. The academic argument that rages on this topic is about agency. Who was truly making the decision in these moments? Was the husband, crushed by grief and pressure, really the one choosing, or was he merely a pawn, a rubber stamp for a decision already made by the collective weight of the church and the community? Some scholars argue that the priest held the ultimate power, as the gatekeeper to the afterlife. Others point to the patriarchal family structure, suggesting the father-in-law or village elder had the final say. The husband was often just the tragic figurehead, forced to voice the consent that tradition demanded. From your bed, you watch this terrible pantomime. You see your husband's shoulders slump. You see him look from the stern face of the priest to the impassive face of the surgeon. And then, finally, his gaze drifts towards you. His eyes are filled with a sorrow, so deep it feels like a physical blow. It is a look of apology, of defeat, of farewell. You see him give a small, almost imperceptible nod. The debate is over. The council has reached its verdict. 2 souls entered this room. Only one will be given a chance to leave. The small, almost imperceptible nod from your husband is the signal. It's not a moment of high drama, no loud proclamation. It's a quiet, devastating gesture of surrender. The council of men dissolves. The priest steps back into the shadows, his work of moral persuasion done. The elder places a heavy, solemn hand on your husband's shoulder before retreating towards the door. The decision has been made for you. The path is now set in stone. Your husband walks towards you, his feet seeming to drag, as if the weight of his choice has settled into his bones. He kneels by your bedside, taking your hand in his. His hands, usually so warm and strong, are ice cold and trembling. He tries to speak, to explain, to apologize, but the words catch in his throat. What could he possibly say? I have just condemned you to death to save a child. You will never know. The priest says, it is God's will our family needs and ale. The justification, which seemed so powerful and logical when spoken by the other men, now sound like hollow, cruel excuses in the face of your living, breathing presence. So he says nothing. He just looks at you, his eyes swimming with tears that he is too proud or too broken to let fall. And in that look, you read the entire tragic story. You see the man you married, the life you built together, the future you had both dreamed of, all of it dissolving into this one horrific moment. You are not angry. You are too far beyond anger. You are too far beyond anger. There is only a vast, empty sea of sorrow. You squeeze his hand, a flicker of your old strength returning. A gesture that is both a forgiveness and a farewell. It is the last act of love you will ever show him. He is gently but firmly pulled away by your mother-in-law, who leads him out of the birthing corner, leaving you alone with the barber surgeon. The curtain is pulled shut again, not for privacy, but to shield the others from what is about to happen. This final act is not for them to see. This moment is a stark illustration of the legal and social status of women. In this era, you are not considered a fully autonomous person in the eyes of the law. You are, in legal terms, a femme covert, your identity covered by or absorbed into that of your husband. He has legal authority over your body, your property, and your life. While this was rarely exercised in such a brutal fashion, the underlying legal framework made his decision not just a moral choice, but a legal right, consenting on your behalf as you were not deemed capable of consenting for yourself, especially in your weakened state. The historical debate here centers on the concept of patriarchal bargain. Did women passively accept this system, or did they find ways to resist or negotiate within it? Some historians argue that women, by fulfilling their roles as wives and mothers, gained a degree of informal power and security, a bargain, where they traded autonomy for protection. In a situation like this, however, the brutal terms of that bargain are laid bare. When your primary function, childbearing, fails in a catastrophic way, the protection is withdrawn, and your lack of fundamental rights becomes fatally apparent. The strange and poignant counterpoint to this powerlessness can be found in the wills of pregnant women. In some regions, it was customary for an expectant mother to make a will before her confinement. This was a tacit acknowledgement of the extreme danger of childbirth. These documents are fascinating because they represent one of the few instances where a married woman could exercise a degree of legal and economic agency. She could bequeath her personal possessions, her clothing, her jewelry, the pots from her kitchen to her daughters or other female relatives. It was a small pocket of autonomy in a world that granted her very little. It was a way of saying, if I do not survive, this at least is mine to give. It's a sad irony that the moment of your greatest physical vulnerability might also be the moment of your greatest legal power. The barber surgeon is now making his final preparations. He doesn't speak to you. The time for words is long past. He is all business, his movements efficient and chillingly detached. He is preparing his instruments, and you can hear the soft scrape of metal on metal as he lays them out on a small wooden table he has brought into the curtained-off space. The decision has been made for you by a council of men, based on a logic you cannot fight, rooted in laws and beliefs that render you powerless. You are now simply waiting for the sentence to be carried out. The faint hope that had sustained you for so many hours has been surgically removed, long before the knife has even touched your skin. The sound from behind the curtain ceases. The barber surgeon turns and places a small, three-legged stool beside your bed. On it, he unrolls a thick leather flap, revealing the tools of his trade. And your blood runs cold. This is not the clean, precise, almost delicate toolkit of a modern surgeon. This is the arsenal of a butcher. The instruments gleam with a dull, menacing light from the single candle. They are large, heavy, and brutally functional. You see a collection of knives, but they don't look like medical scalpels. They are closer to kitchen knives or small daggers with thick wooden or bone handles designed for a firm, forceful grip. There is no concept of a disposable blade. These have been used before, and will be used again. They have been sharpened on a whetstone and wiped clean on an oily rag, but the faint, dark patina of past work clings to them. Alongside the knives, there are other, more terrifying objects. You see large curved needles, thick as a nail, with coarse linen thread already looped through them. These are not for delicate suturing, they are for crudely stitching together gaping wounds, like mending a tear in a piece of burlap. There are retractors, heavy iron hooks designed to pull back flesh and muscle to give the surgeon access. They look like something you would find in a blacksmith's forge. But they are clumsy and powerful, designed to grip and crush, not to handle tissue with care. This collection of horrors is the physical manifestation of the state of surgical knowledge at the time. Anatomy was still a poorly understood science. Dissection of human bodies was oft unforbidden by the church and viewed with public revulsion, so most of what a barber surgeon knew about the inside of the body was based on battlefield experience or from dissecting animals. He knew where the major organs were, more or less, but his understanding of the delicate web of blood vessels, nerves, and muscle layers was rudimentary at best. His technique was not one of precision and finesse, it was one of speed and force. The goal of any major surgery, like an amputation, was to get it over with as quickly as possible, before the patient died of shock and blood loss on the table. One of the most bizarre and unnerving items you might see on that leather roll is a cauterizing iron. This is a heavy piece of metal, shaped perhaps like a flat disc or a dull blade with a long handle. It would be heated in the fire until it glowed red hot. Its purpose was to stop bleeding. After an amputation or a large incision, the surgeon would press the searing hot iron against the open wound, burning the flesh and blood vessels shut. It was a terrifyingly brutal and painful method of hemostasis, and while it sometimes worked, it also caused massive tissue damage and created a perfect, sterile on the surface, but deeply cooked environment for anaerobic bacteria like tetanus to thrive. The very tools to save a life often introduced a new, more insidious way to die a few days later. The historical debate surrounding these instruments is about innovation versus stagnation. Why did surgical tools remain so crude for so long? Some historians argue that the lack of two key things, anesthesia and sepsis, created a vicious cycle. Without the ability to control pain, surgeons had to be fast, which favored heavy, strong, fast-cutting tools over slow, precise ones. Without an understanding of germs, there was no impetus to design instruments that could be easily sterilized. The goal wasn't a clean, neat wound, it was just to get the job done before the patient bled out or died of shock. It took the twin revolutions of ether and carbolic acid in the 19th century to break this cycle and usher in the era of modern surgical instrument. The barber surgeon selects his primary tool. It's a knife, but it's not small. It's a broad-bladed, heavy instrument, almost a short sword. The formal name for it was a bistawai, but looking at it, all you can think of is the knife your husband uses to slaughter a pig. He tests the edge with his thumb, his face impassive. He is not a monster. He is not a monster. He is a man, he is a professional, preparing to do a difficult job that no one else is willing or able to do. He is the last resort, the final, terrible. But to you, lying helpless on the bed, he is death personified. He turns towards you, the knife held loosely in his hand. The faint light catches the sharpened edge, and it sends a sliver of cold, terrifying light dancing across the wall. The sight of it, the cold, hard reality of it, cuts through the fog of your exhaustion. This is real. This is happening. The abstract decision made by the men by the fire has now resolved itself into this single, gleaming point of steel. The barber surgeon places the knife back on the leather roll for a moment and turns to your mother-in-law, who has crept back into the birthing corner, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask. He mutters a single word: brandy. Or it might be gin or whiskey or whatever crude, high-proof spirit is available. She scurries away and returns with a small clay cup filled with a harsh-smelling liquor. This is not an act of hospitality. This is your anesthesia. She brings the cup to your lips, her hand trembling so badly that some of the liquid slushes onto your chin, burning with a coal fire. Drink, child, she whispers, her voice choked with tears. Drink it all. You are too weak to resist, too terrified to do anything but obey. You swallow the fiery liquid, and it sears a path down your raw throat and into your empty stomach. It hits you with a dizzying, sickening force. The room swims, the edges of your vision blur, but it doesn't numb the pain. It doesn't bring the mercy of unconsciousness. It only adds a layer of disorientation and confusion to your terror. This was the absolute pinnacle of pain management available in your era for a procedure like this. For centuries, this was it, a stiff drink of alcohol and maybe, if you were lucky, a stick to bite down on. The very concept of anesthesia, the ability to render a patient unconscious and insensible to pain during surgery, was a distant, unimaginable dream. Surgeons and patients alike accepted that surgery and agony were inseparable partners. The virtue of a patient was to be stoic, the virtue of a surgeon was to be fast. The history of the search for anesthesia is a fascinating journey of trial and error. For centuries, healers had experimented with various substances. Opium, in the form of laudanum, was widely used, but it was unreliable. A dose large enough to dull the pain of surgery was often large enough to suppress breathing and kill the patient. Mandrake root and henbane were also used, brewed into soporific sponges that were held over the patient's nose and mouth. These contained alkaloids that could induce a state of stupor, but their effects were unpredictable and often came with terrifying hallucinations. For most people, in most situations, these options were unavailable or considered too dangerous. Alcohol was the standard. A particularly strange and little-known attempt at pain control was something called compression. This involved applying a tourniquet-like device to the main nerve of the limb being operated on, crushing it to block the transmission of pain signals. It was a brutal, damaging technique that sometimes worked for amputations, but it was obviously useless for a surgery on the torso. Another method, even more extreme, was a controlled concussion, literally knocking the patient out with a swift blow to the head. It's a testament to the horror of surgery that this was considered a viable, even compassionate option. The academic debate here focuses on the psychological impact of this reality. How did the universal experience of agonizing pain shape the pre-modern worldview? Some historians argue that it created a culture of stoicism and a different relationship with the body. Pain was not something to be eliminated, but something to be endured, a part of the natural, God-given order of life. It was seen as having a purpose, whether as a divine punishment for sin or a test of faith. Others argue that this is a romanticized view, and that the reality was a pervasive, low-level dread of injury and a deep-seated terror of the surgeon's knife that is difficult for us, in our age of epiduralist and general anesthesia, to fully comprehend. The cup is empty. The alcohol is doing its work, but not the work you would wish for. It makes you feel hot and dizzy, but your senses are still sharp, your awareness of the cold dread in the room undiminished. It has not dulled your fear. It has only made you less able to control it. You want to scream, to fight, to run, but your body is a leaden weight, pinned to the bed by exhaustion and now by the clumsy chemical shackles of the liquor. The barber surgeon picks up a small leather strap. He doesn't offer it to you to bite on. He gives it to the midwife, who has been standing by silently, her own face ashen. He gives a curt nod towards your hands. The midwife understands. With a look of profound apology, she takes the strap and uses it to bind your hands together, then ties them to the rough wooden frame of the bed. It's a final, horrific indignity. You are being restrained, tied down like an animal, to prevent you from thrashing and interfering with the work of the man who is about to kill you. The last of your agency, the ability to even move your hands, has been taken away. You are completely and utterly at their mercy. With your hands bound, a new and terrible stillness descends. The preparations are over. The time for action has arrived. The barber surgeon gives a nod to your mother-in-law and the midwife. They understand the signal. This is the moment of farewell. Your mother-in-law, who has been a figure of stern authority throughout your marriage, completely dissolves. Her face, usually set in a hard, pragmatic mask, crumples like a piece of paper. Great, silent tears roll down her wrinkled cheeks as she kneels beside you. She takes your head in her hands and presses her lips to your forehead, a gesture of maternal love you have rarely, if ever, received from her. It's a kiss of benediction and of goodbye. Her voice so thick with grief it's barely a whisper. She is losing not just a daughter-in-law, but the future she had envisioned, the grandmother she was about to become. Then she makes way for your own mother. She has been in the room all along, a silent, peripheral figure, respecting the authority of your husband's family in their own home. But now, all pretense of social hierarchy falls away. She rushes to your side, her face a mirror of your untarred pain. She doesn't speak. She simply grabs your bound hands, her grip desperate, as if she could physically hold you back from the abyss that is yawning open before you. She looks into your eyes, and in that shared gaze is a lifetime of unspoken understanding. She is the only other person in this room who truly knows the terror of the birthing bed. She has been on this journey herself. She sees her own daughter, her own flesh and blood, at the end of a path that she, by sheer luck, survived. Her sorrow is primal. It's the grief of a mother watching her child be led to slaughter. She presses her tear-soaked cheek against yours, and you can feel the shudders that rack her body. This is the most intimate and the most painful moment of your life, a shared agony that transcends words. This scene, this last goodbye, was a formalized and expected part of the ritual of a dangerous birth or a deathbed. It wasn't just an emotional outburst, it was a structured social practice. It was the moment for final blessings, for the asking them, granting of forgiveness for any past wrongs, for the commending of the dying person's soul to God. For you, it's also the moment you would pass on any final wishes. You might whisper to your mother, "Look after the girls, if you had other children," or "Give my wedding linens to my sister." It was a desperate attempt to impose a tiny sliver of order and personal will onto a situation of complete chaos and powerlessness. A poignant and often overlooked aspect of this moment is the role of material objects. Before the final farewell, your mother might press a small, worn wooden crucifix into your hand, tucking it between your fingers and the leather strap that binds you. Or it might be a small silver coin, meant to pay the symbolic ferryman to the afterlife. These objects, known as viaticum, a broader term for the final Eucharist, but also applied to these tokens, were incredibly important. They were tangible links to faith, to family, and to the human world, something to cling to as you face the great, terrifying unknown. They were a final, desperate anchor. The historical debate here often revolves around the emotional landscape of the past. The traditional view, championed by historians like Philippe Ayres, was that in an age of high mortality, people were more stoic and less emotionally attached, especially to children who might not survive infancy. Death was a familiar, public event, and grief was more ritualized and less personal. More recent historians have challenged this, arguing that the abundance of emotional traces in letters, diaries, and even legal documents from the period proves that people felt love and grief just as intensely as we do. The scene in your room, round filled with unrestrained sorrow, supports this latter view. The pain of your family is not performative, it is deep, real, and devastating. The midwife, Goody Clark, gently touches your mother's shoulder. "It is time," she says, her voice full of a sorrowful authority. Your mother doesn't want to let go, but she knows she must. She gives your hands one last, desperate squeeze and allows herself to be led away, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She joins your mother-in-law and your husband, who are huddled by the door, their faces turned away, unable to walk. The curtain is drawn shut one last time. The sounds of weeping fade, replaced by an echoing silence. The goodbyes have been said. The final connections to your life have been severed. You are alone now in this small, dim space, with the man who holds the knife. The world has been winnowed down to this single terrible point. The curtain closes, and the world outside of it ceases to exist. The muffled sounds of your family's grief are a distant echo from another lifetime. Your universe has shrunk to the size of this small, claustrophobic space, lit by a single guttering candle that casts long, dancing shadows on the rough fabric walls. The air is thick and still, heavy with the smell of fear, sweat, and the cheap spirits you were forced to drink. It is no longer a birthing corner. It has become a sacrificial altar, and you are the offering. You are not alone, but you have never felt so profoundly isolated. The barber surgeon is there, a large dark presence at your side. And he is not alone either. Standing at the head of the bed, out of your direct line of sight, are two other men. You might recognize them as the blacksmith's stout sons or perhaps two farmhands from a neighboring plot. They are not here for medical reasons. They have been summoned for their brute strength. Their job is simple and horrific: to hold you down. One positions himself at your shoulders, the other at your legs. Their hands are heavy and calloused, their grip firm and unyielding. They do not speak. They are grim-faced, avoiding your eyes, their expressions a mixture of pity and a kind of grim-faced determination to get through the unpleasant task ahead. The indignity is absolute. You are being physically overpowered, your body treated as a rebellious animal that must be subdued. The last vestiges of your personhood are stripped away. You are now just flesh and bone, a problem to be physically managed. This practice of using lay people to restrain patients was standard procedure for any major surgery before anesthesia. The ideal patient was one who fainted from shock or fear at the start of the procedure. But for those who remained conscious, restraint was the only way to ensure the surgeon could work without being kicked, grabbed, or jostled, which could lead to a fatal slip of the knife. Accounts from early surgical theaters often describe the screams of the patient mingling with the shouts of the surgeon and the grunts of the assistants holding them down. It was a scene of controlled, medicalized violence. The barber surgeon doesn't wait. He knows that shock is his enemy and speed is his only ally. He takes a piece of rough linen, the same fabric used for flour sacks, and unceremoniously drapes it over your torso, covering your face. This is not forced sterility. It is a crude but effective way to muffle your screams and to spare him from having to look at your face while he works. It is the final act of Arasua. You are now faceless, a completely depersonalized subject. Beneath the suffocating darkness of the cloth, your senses are heightened. You can hear the surgeon's steady, rhythmic breathing. You can hear the soft whisper of his leather apron as he leans over you. You can feel the weight of the men holding you down, their presence an undeniable, terrifying reality. The world is a black, airless void, and all you can do is wait for the final, unimaginable pain. A strange and terrible detail from historical accounts of these procedures is what the surgeons themselves focused on. In their own writings, they often spoke not of the patient's pain but of the technical challenges. They would describe the thickness of the abdominal wall, the difficulty of cutting through the muscle, the amount of blood. It was a professional detachment, a coping mechanism, but to a modern reader, it sounds chillingly cold. And they compartmentalized the human horror of it in order to function. The screaming patient under the sheet was, in a way, just part of the difficult working conditions. The historical debate here touches on the very nature of empathy. Was the barber surgeon a cruel, unfeeling brute, or was he a man forced by the limitations of his time into a role that required him to suppress his own humanity in order to perform what was seen as a necessary, even life-saving, act for the child? Historians like Joanna Burke have written about the desensitization required for work that involves violence, whether it's a soldier, a butcher, or a pre-modern surgeon. It's not necessarily a lack of empathy, but an active, necessary suppression of it in order to do the job. To feel what you were feeling would be to be paralyzed and unable to act. Under the cloth, you are trapped in the prison of your own mind. There is nothing to hear but the thundering of your own heart. Time stretches and distorts. A second feels like an eternity. You pray for unconsciousness, for the world to simply end. But the alcohol and the adrenaline have created a state of hyper-awareness. You are more alive, more terrifyingly present in your own body than you have ever been. The room has been prepared. The assistants are in place. The stage is set for the final, brutal act. Under the suffocating darkness of the linen shroud, you hold your breath. The world has been reduced to a roaring in your ears and the terrifying, immediate presence of your own body. You feel the barber surgeon's hand, heavy and surprisingly warm, rest on your abdomen. It's not a comforting touch. It is the touch of a craftsman measuring his material. He is judging the placement, finding the landmark of your navel, calculating the line of his incision. Clinical touch is the last moment of stillness before the storm. And then it comes. There are no words in any language to adequately describe the sensation. It is not pain. Pain is a word for a toothache, for a broken bone, for the contractions that now seem like a distant, almost gentle memory. This is an annihilation of the senses. It is a feeling of being split apart, of your very being torn into by a bolt of white-hot lightning. The surgeon's knife is not the fine, sharp scalpel of today that parts the skin with a clean, almost painless line. His heavy bestow is a to love force. It doesn't just cut, it rips and tears its way through skin, fat, and muscle. You feel the gruesome, pulling drag of the blade as he makes one long vertical incision from just below your sternum down to your pubic bone. A scream is torn from your throat, a raw, inhuman sound that is immediately muffled by the cloth over your face. Your body alters violently against the hands that hold you down, a desperate, futile rebellion of muscle and nerve. The men grunt with effort, their grips tightening, their weight pressing you back onto the blood-soaked linens. This is the moment that separated the idea of a caesarean section from its survivable reality for centuries. The primary killer was not the cut itself, but what came immediately after hemorrhage and shock. The surgeon, with his rudimentary knowledge of anatomy, was cutting blindly through layers of muscle and a dense web of blood vessels. He had no delicate clamps to tie off individual bleeders. The blood loss was immediate, massive, and catastrophic. The second killer was shock, the body's overwhelming response to an injury and pain so profound that its systems simply shut down. The surgeon works with a brutal, desperate speed. He doesn't have time for finesse. After the initial cut, he might even use his hands to bluntly dissect, to tear through the remaining layers of tissue to reach the womb itself. The womb, the uterus, is a thick, muscular organ, engorged with blood to nourish the pregnancy. Cutting into it unleashes a second, even more terrifying wave of bleeding. A grim and little-known fact about these early procedures is the debate over where to make the uterine incision. For a long time, surgeons continued to make a long, vertical cut in the main body of the uterus, mirroring the cut on the abdomen. They didn't realize that this area was the most muscular and blood-rich part of the organ, and that a wound here would almost never stop bleeding on its own. It took until the late 19th century for surgeons to realize that a smaller, horizontal incision in the lower, thinner segment of the uterus, the technique still used today, bled far less and healed much better. For centuries they were unknowingly making the most dangerous cut possible. Beneath the shroud, your world is nothing but this all-consuming, fiery agony. The smell of your own blood, coppery and sickening, fills the small space. You are aware of the surgeon's grunts of effort, the wet, tearing sounds of his work, the frantic, slippery feeling of his hands inside your body. The alcohol you drank offers no protection. It feels as though every nerve ending in your body is screaming at once. The historical debate here is a chilling one. Did the surgeons of the time truly comprehend the level of pain they were inflicting on one level? They obviously knew it was agonizing. But did they understand it in the way we do, as a destructive, damaging force in its own right? The prevailing medical theory, inherited from the ancients, often saw pain as a diagnostic sign, even a necessary part of the healing process. The idea of pain as a purely negative, pathological state to be eliminated at all costs is a surprisingly modern concept. Some medical historians argue that the sympathy of the surgeon was directed not at the patient's immediate suffering, but at the ultimate goal, saving the child's life or removing a diseased limb. They had to intellectually and emotionally bypass the horror of the present moment to focus on the desired outcome. You feel a sudden violent lurch inside you as the surgeon finally succeeds in his task. There is a sense of immense, brutal pressure, and then a strange, hollow emptiness. You are no longer one. The connection is severed. The long, 9-month journey of carrying another life within you has ended in this moment of savage, bloody separation. The lightning bolt of pain gives way to a spreading, terrifying cold as the life force strains out of you. The roaring in your ears grows louder, and the blackness under the cloth begins to feel absolute. In the moment after the horrific, tearing separation, a new sound pierces the thick, blood-soaked air of the room. It's not your scream, which has dissolved into a ragged, guttural moan. It's not the grunting of the men holding you down. It's a sound that is both miraculous and, in this context, monstrously out of place. It's the thin, reedy wail of a newborn baby. For a single, surreal moment, all other sounds cease. The barber surgeon, his arms slick with blood to his elbows, holds up the small, slippery form. The men restraining you might loosen their grips lightly, their grim task momentarily forgotten, as they stare at the tiny, gasping creature that has been violently pulled into the world. Outside the curtain, the sound of your family's weeping catches in their throats. They hear it. The cry, the impossible longed for, and now terrifying sound of life. The baby's cry is a biological miracle. It means its lungs have inflated, that it has survived the long traumatic ordeal of the obstructed labor and the brutal shock of its birth. It is alive. In the grim calculus of this world, the gamble has paid off. The primary objective has been achieved. A soul has been delivered from the failing vessel of your body, and it has been delivered with breath still in it. But for you, lying under the shroud in the spreading pool of your own blood, the sound is a distant, hollow echo. It is the sound of your own death sentence being read aloud. It is the confirmation that your sacrifice has been deemed a success. The focus of everyone in the room, of everyone in the room, of everyone in the room, of everyone in the cottage, immediately shifts from you to that small, crying infant. You have served your purpose. You are now the aftermath, the wreckage from which the prize has been salvaged. The barber surgeon doesn't spare you a glance. His job is not yet over, but its most important part is complete. With a practice motion, he takes a piece of the coarse linen thread the midwife had prepared hours ago in another lifetime. It seems, and quickly ties off the umbilical cord. He uses his knife to sever it, the final physical connection between you and the child you will never hold. The baby, now a separate entity, is immediately passed off over your body to the waiting hands of the midwife. This moment highlights a fascinating and heartbreaking piece of social and religious history: the race to baptize. The infant's first few minutes of life were considered its most spiritual or perilous. The midwife, Goody Clark, takes the baby not to clean it or wrap it warmly, but to rush it to the small bowl of holy water that the priest has prepared. The child's first experience of the world outside the womb is not a mother's embrace, but the cold splash of water and the hurried Latin words of an emergency baptism. Ego te baptize eo in nomine Patris, et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Sometimes this was so rushed and panicked that it led to a rather bizarre legal and theological problem: the baptism of the wrong gender. In the dim, chaotic, bloody scene, a midwife or priest might mistake the sex of the newborn and baptize it with a boy's name when it was a girl, or vice versa. This created a conundrum for the church. Was the baptism still valid? Theologians debated this endlessly. The general consensus was that God, in his wisdom, would know the true intent, and the sacrament was valid, but it speaks to the sheer terror and haste of the moment that such a fundamental error could be made. The historical debate around this moment is about memory and legacy. How was this event recorded and remembered by the family and the community? Your death would be recorded in the parish register, perhaps with a simple note: died in childbed. The birth and baptism of your child would be recorded on the same day. For future generations, looking at these dry records, it would just be a tragic coincidence. A mother lost while giving life. The conscious choice to sacrifice you would be smoothed over, softened into a more palatable narrative of maternal martyrdom. You would become a saintly, tragic figure in your family's history, the mother who gave her all for her child. The violence, the terror, the choice made by the men, all of that would be erased from the story. The baby's cry, which had faltered, now strengthens into a steady, robust wail. It is a sound of pure, demanding life. It fills the small cottage, a sound of continuity, of a future secured. But for you, it is the closing music of your own life. The sounds of the room begin to fade, the sharp edges of the agony blurring. The roaring in your ears returns, louder this time, a great, rushing wave. The world outside the shroud has forgotten you. The cry of the baby is the new center of the universe. All energy in the small cottage, which for 2 days has been focused on you and your struggle, now gravitates towards this new, tiny life. The child is whisked away from the bloody scene of its birth, out from behind the curtain and into the main room, where it is finally received into the arms of its family. The midwife, her face a mixture of professional triumph and deep personal sorrow, quickly wraps the infant in a clean, warm blanket. She is the one who presents your child, to your husband. He reaches out, his hands trembling, and takes the small, squirming bundle. He looks down at the tiny, wrinkled face, at the miniature fists waving in the air. This is his heir. This is the child for whom he just made an impossible choice. This face is a canvas of conflicting emotions: relief, wonder, profound grief, and a dawning, crushing guilt that will likely shadow him for the rest of his days. Your mother-in-law peers over his shoulder, her tears of sorrow for you now mingling with tears of joy for her grandchild. "Hey boy," she whispers, her voice filled with awe and reverence. "God has given us a son. The survival of the family name is secure. The land has its inheritor. In their eyes, the sacrifice has been justified. The narrative is already being written, a tragic loss, but a blessed gain." No one looks back towards the curtain. No one asks about you. Your role in the story is over. You are the prologue, and the main chapter has just begun. This immediate transfer of attention is not just a sign of callousness, it's a reflection of the brutal pragmatism required for survival in this world. A newborn infant is incredibly vulnerable. Its first few hours are critical. The focus on cleaning it, warming it, and attempting to get it to feed is an urgent matter of life and death. Your death, on the other hand, is now seen as a slow, foregone conclusion. There is nothing more to be done for you. Spiritual law redirected to the one who still has a chance. A fascinating and poignant detail of this moment is the search for a wet nurse. Since you will not be there to breastfeed, finding a source of milk is the most immediate and pressing concern. If the family is wealthy, a wet nurse might have already been on standby. But for a family like yours, the search is a frantic, desperate affair. Your husband, still reeling, would have to send a message out into the village, seeking a woman who has recently given birth herself and has milk to spare. This created a complex social and economic transaction. The wet nurse's own child might have to make do with less milk, or be fed on crude and often dangerous alternatives like animal milk or a thin porridge of bread and water, so that your child, the child of a family that could pay, could survive. The survival of your baby was often directly linked to the potential malnourishment of another. The historical debate here concerns the very nature of motherhood and family. Was the biological mother seen as the primary and irreplaceable parent, as she is in most modern cultures, or was the concept of mothering more communal and fluid? Historians, like Valerie Fields, have shown that wet nursing was a widespread and accepted practice across all centuries. For the aristocracy, it was a matter of convenience and a desire for the lady of the house to become pregnant again quickly. Breastfeeding can act as a natural contraceptive. For the poor, it was a matter of grim necessity. The idea that breast is best and that a mother's own milk is crucial for bonding is a relatively modern cultural construct. In your world, a living wet nurse was infinitely better than a dead mother. Behind the curtain, the barber surgeon is making a cursory, almost hopeless, attempt to close you. He is not a skilled seamstress. He takes his large curved needle and the thick linen thread and begins to crudely sew the gaping wound in your abdomen. He is not trying to save you. He knows that is impossible. The internal bleeding is unstoppable, and the infection that is already beginning to brew will be fatal. This act of stitching is not a medical procedure. It is a gesture of tidings, of preparing a body for burial. He is simply closing the door on a room he has already destroyed. He works quickly, his stitches large and clumsy, pulling your flesh together with a grim functionality. The baby, your baby, is now settled, wrapped, and safe in its grandmother's arms. The sounds of its crying have softened into small, contented snuffles. The family is beginning to breathe again, to look to the future. They have their heir. The line will continue. But this continuity has been purchased at a terrible price. The child has been brought into a world, but it has been brought into a world that has a mother-shaped hole at its very center. A life has begun. But it has begun in a room where another life is now, quietly and irrevocably ending. The child has been carried away, and you have been left behind. The crude, painful stitching is finished. The barber surgeon wipes his hands and his instruments on a bloody rag, packs his leather roll with a tradesman's efficiency, and slips out from behind the curtain. He says a few low words to your husband, likely instructions on how to handle the inevitable, collects his fee, and leaves your cottage, disappearing back into the night. His work is done. He has fulfilled his contract. The men who were holding you down are gone. The curtain is pulled slightly aside, and the world filters back in, but it's a distorted, dreamlike version of the one you knew. The light from the fire seems impossibly bright. You are no longer in pain. The agony that was an all-consuming fire has burned itself out, leaving behind a strange, hollow emptiness. The massive blood loss and the overwhelming shock have short-circuited your nervous system. You are drifting now, floating on a calm, quiet sea. Your body feels light, untethered, as if it no longer belongs to you. You are aware of a profound, spreading coldness, starting in your fingertips and toes and creeping inwards, a slow, inexorable tide. Your mother is beside you again. She has taken a damp cloth and is gently, lovingly wiping the blood and sweat from your face and neck. Her tears fall onto your skin, warmer than the coldness that is claiming you. She is not speaking. There is nothing left to say. Her presence is a silent, final vigil. She is here to accompany you on the first few steps of this last journey, to ensure you are not alone when you cross the final threshold. This period of transition, the final hours between a catastrophic injury and death, was a deeply significant time in the pre-modern world. It was known as the agony, from the Greek word agonia meaning a struggle or contest. This wasn't just a medical state, it was a profound spiritual event. It was believed that in these final moments, a person's soul was engaged in its last great battle. Demons, it was said, would gather at the deathbed, tempting the dying soul with visions of worldly pleasures or whispering doubts about God's mercy, trying to snatch it away at its moment of greatest weakness. The role of the family and the priest was to act as spiritual guardians, to fight off these demonic forces with prayers and holy objects. The priest, who had been waiting in the background, now comes forward. He leans close, his presence filling your fading vision. He holds a crucifix to your lips for you to kiss. He anoints your forehead with holy oil, performing the sacrament of extreme unction, or the last rites. He murmurs the prayers for the dying in Latin. The ancient words are soft, rhythmic rumble that you feel more than hear. Proficiis seer, anima Christiana, de hoc mundo go forth, Christian soul, from this world, from this world. This ritual was not just a comfort, it was seen as an essential spiritual weapon, arming your soul for the battle ahead and cleansing it of any remaining sin before it faced its creator. A strange and specific belief from this time was the idea of the good death versus the bad death. A good death was one like this, foreseen, prepared for, with family gathered and the final sacraments administered. It was an ordered, controlled departure. A bad death was a sudden one, an accident, a stroke, a murder that caught the soul unprepared, without confession or last rites, leaving its eternal fate in jeopardy. There was a whole genre of literature and art called ars moriendi, the art of dying, which were essentially guidebooks on how to achieve a good death, both for the dying person and their family. In a grim, ironic way, the horrific, prolonged nature of your death has allowed you to have a good death in the eyes of your community. The historical debate here is about the function of these rituals. Were they primarily for the comfort of the dying, or for the consolation of the living? Many historians argue that the last rites and the deathbed vigil were as much about reassuring the family as they were about saving the soul. By performing these rituals, the family could feel that they had done everything possible, that they had fulfilled their sacred duty. It provided a clear, structured way to process grief and to find meaning in a devastating loss. It transformed a messy, terrifying biological event into an ordered, significant spiritual passage. You are floating further and further away now. The priest's face blurs, becoming just a pale shape in the dim light. Your mother's touch on your hand feels distant, a faint pressure from another world. The roaring in your ears is a gentle, all-encompassing hum. The darkness behind your eyes is no longer frightening, but soft and welcoming. Like black velvet, you are drifting on a peaceful, silent river, and you have no desire to fight the current. The struggle is over. Your final, quiet breath fogs the small, polished mirror that the midwife holds to your lips. The fog clears and does not return. It is over. Your mother's grip on your hand slackens, and her silent tears finally give way to a low, keening wail of grief. The vigil is ended. The soul has departed. The cottage, which for days has been a place of intense, focused struggle, is now filled with a different kind of energy, the heavy, echoing silence of loss. But elsewhere in the village, perhaps the very next morning, another, more mundane ritual is taking place. The barber surgeon sits at his wooden table, the same one where his family eats their meals. By the light of a morning window, he opens a large, leather-bound book. This is his ledger, his account book. It is the most important document of his professional life. With a quill pen, he dips the nib into a pot of black, iron gall ink, and with a steady, practiced hand, he makes a new entry. He will not write your name. He may not even know it. His entry will be stark and practical. It might read something like to Goodman Thomas, for the extraction of a child from his wife, and on the right side of the page, he will note the fee. It might be a few shillings, a significant sum that your husband will likely have to pay in installments. Or, if your family is poorer, the payment might be recorded in kind, one suckling pig, or a promise of 3 days' labor during the harvest. This ledger is a chillingly dispassionate record of human suffering. On the same page as your life-ending surgery, there might be an entry for pulling a tooth for the baker's wife 1 penny, netting the blood for a farmer with a fever 2 pence, and mending a broken arm for a boy who fell out of a tree 6 pence. Your immense tragedy is reduced to a simple commercial transaction, sandwiched between the mundane aches and pains of village life. It is a stark reminder that, for the barber surgeon, this was not a unique, soul-shattering event. It was his job. It was a Tuesday. This practice of keeping ledgers gives historians an invaluable, if grim, window into the daily realities of pre-modern medical practice. These are not heroic tales of medical breakthroughs, they are the records of a trade. They show what services were common, how much they cost, and how people paid for them. They reveal a world where healthcare was not a right, but a commodity to be purchased, bargained for, and recorded like any other good or service. A particularly interesting and somewhat bizarre detail that can be gleaned from these ledgers is the sheer variety of services offered. A single barber surgeon's account book might list, in addition to surgeries and tooth pulling, fees for cutting of hair for the entire household, concocting a love potion, a service he would likely deny if asked by the priest, or even worming of a dog. He was a multi-purpose village resource, his skills ranging from the medical to the cosmetic to the veterinary. This lack of specialization is a hallmark of a pre-industrial economy, where a craftsman had to be a jack of all trades to survive. The historical debate surrounding these financial records is about the professionalization of medicine. When did the healer become a professional? Some historians argue that the very act of keeping a ledger, of systemating fees and tracking accounts, is a key step towards professionalization. It marks the shift from a model of neighborly help or religious charity to a formal, commercial relationship. Others argue that true professionalization only came much later, with the rise of universities, licensing bodies, and a shared scientific framework. They would see the barber surgeon's ledger not as a professional document, but as the simple account book of a tradesman, no different from that of a candlemaker or a blacksmith. The ink on the page dries. The barber surgeon blots it with a little sand, closes the heavy leather-bound book, and puts it away. He has recorded the transaction. The account is settled, at least in a financial sense. He will now go about his day, perhaps shaving a local merchant or setting the bone of a cow. He will not think of you again. He cannot afford to. He has other patients to see, other fees to earn. In his ledger, you are not a woman, a wife, a daughter. You are a line item, an extraction, a fee to be collected. Your entire world-ending ordeal has been flattened, quantified, and neatly entered into the long, grim accounting of his trade, while your family begins the sacred preparations for your burial. Your final legacy, in the cold, hard records of the man who ended your life, is that of a debt to be paid. While the barber surgeon closes his ledger, your story is just beginning to be rewritten in the minds of your family and community. Your body, now washed and dressed in a simple linen shroud by the women of your family, lies on the table in the center of your cottage. The birthing corner has been dismantled. The blood-soaked straw and linens have been burned. The room has been cleansed, transformed from a place of violent birth to a place of quiet, solemn mourning. Your son, the tiny, fragile creature whose life was purchased with your own, is the new, undisputed center of this family. He is a symbol of both devastating loss and miraculous survival. He is the living embodiment of the sacrifice you made, and as such, he is treated with a kind of reverence. He is passed from your husband's arms to his grandmother's, his every cry and snuffler attended to with an anxious, laser-like focus. This is the moment your legacy is forged. You will not be remembered as a victim of a brutal, primitive surgery. You will not be remembered as a woman whose body failed. You will be canonized. In the stories told to your son as he grows up, you will become a saint, a martyr, the mother who so loved her child that she gave her life for him. The narrative of choice, of the grim council of men, of the barber surgeon's knife, all of that will be softened, blurred, and eventually erased. The story will become a simple, beautiful, and tragic tale of ultimate maternal sacrifice. It is a more comforting story. It is a story that allows everyone to live with what happened. This reframing is essential for the family's psychological survival. Your husband, in particular, needs this new narrative. To live with the rot truth that he actively consented to your death would be an unbearable burden. But to see himself as the grieving widower or the heroic wife who made a noble sacrifice is a role he can inhabit. He can channel his guilt into a profound and lifelong mourning, earning him the sympathy of the community rather than its judgment. The new baby, your son, now has a name. He was baptized in haste, but he will be given a name that carries the weight of his origins. Perhaps he will be named after a saint associated with miracles, like Nicholas, or perhaps he will be given a name that honors you in some way. He is now the repository of all the family's hopes. He will grow up in the shadow of your sacrifice, constantly reminded that his life came at the greatest possible cost. A fascinating and poignant historical detail is the concept of posthumous children. A child like your son, whose mother died in childbirth, occupied a special and somewhat ambiguous place in society. They were often viewed with a mixture of pity and awe, as if they were touched by the supernatural, having come so directly from the world of the dead. There were superstitions about them that they might have the second sight or be able to communicate with ghosts. Your son's life will forever be defined by the dramatic circumstances of his birth. The historical debate here centers on the construction of memory. How do families and societies create narratives to make sense of trauma? Historians who study memory and oral history argue that personal and collective memories are not static recordings of the past, but are actively shaped and reshaped over time to serve the needs of the present. The maternal sacrifice narrative is a powerful tool. It provides comfort, it assigns meaning to a meaningless tragedy, and it reinforces the patriarchal ideal of the self-sacrificing woman. It is a story that does important cultural work, even if it is a fabrication. Your son will thrive. The wet nurse's milk will sustain him. He will learn to walk on the same packed earth floor where you lay. He will grow into a man, work the land, marry, and have children of his own. He will be the living proof that the family line, which was on the brink of extinction in that dark, firelit room, has survived. He is the testament to the family's resilience. Your name will be spoken with reverence, but as the years pass, the reality of who you were, your laugh, the way you needed bread, your fears, your dreams will fade. You will become a ghost, a founding myth for a new generation. Your portrait, if you were wealthy enough to have one, would hang over the hearth, a pale, solemn face to be pointed at. That is your grandmother. Your son will tell his own children. She was a good woman. She died so that I could live. Terrifying death has been successfully laundered into a beautiful, inspiring family legend. The sacrifice is complete. The family has its heir, and now it has its saint. Centuries dissolve like mist. The small, wattle and daub cottage where you lived and died has long since crumbled back into the earth. The parish church where your name was recorded in a dusty ledger may be a ruin, or it may have been rebuilt a dozen times. The family line you secured with your life has branched and spread, your DNA carried by hundreds of descendants who will never know your name or your story. Your personal tragedy has been utterly lost to time. A single, silent scream swallowed by the immense, roaring silence of history. But the procedure that ended your life did not disappear. It continued for generation after generation to be a death sentence. For 200 more years, the scene would be replayed with terrifying regularity: the obstructed labor, the exhausted midwife, the grim-faced barber surgeon, the choice, the knife, the scream, the brief cry of a newborn, and the inevitable, quiet death of the mother from hemorrhage or, more often from the raging infection that followed a few days later. The mortality rate for the mother was, for all intents and purposes, 100%. The operation was not a procedure to save two lives, it was a procedure to trade one for the other. Then, in the mid-19th century, in the gaslit operating theatres of Boston and Edinburgh, everything began to change. Two monumental breakthroughs occurred that would have seemed like pure, impossible magic to the people in your cottage. The first was anesthesia. In 1846, an American dentist named William T. G. Morton famously demonstrated the use of inhaled ether to render a patient unconscious during surgery. Suddenly, the surgeon's greatest agonizing pain and the shock it induced was vanquished. Speed was no longer the paramount virtue. A surgeon could now work slowly, carefully, and precisely. The era of butchery was over, and the era of surgery as we know it could begin. The second, and arguably more important, breakthrough was antisepsis. A British surgeon named Joseph Lister, building on the radical germ theory work of the French chemist Louis Pasteur, realized that the invisible miasmas thought to cause post-surgical infection were, in fact, microscopic organisms. In the 1860s, he began experimenting with spraying carbolic acid over the wound, on the instruments, and on his own hands. The rates of post-operative infection, the dreaded hospital gangrene that killed more patients than the knife itself, plummeted. These two innovations transformed surgery from a desperate, last-ditch gamble into a viable, routine medical treatment. And they transformed the caesarean section. A surgeon, now armed with anesthesia and antiseptics, could take his time. He could carefully dissect the layers of the abdominal wall, clamping and tying off individual blood vessels to prevent hemorrhage. He could make a clean, precise incision into the uterus. And most crucially, he could close the wounds in a sterile environment, giving the mother a genuine chance not just to survive the operation but to heal from it. One of the forgotten pioneers who stitched these ideas together was an Italian professor named Edoardo Porro. In 1876, he performed a caesarean section where, after delivering the baby, he performed what was essentially a hysterectomy, removing the uterus and suturing the stump of the cervix. This dramatically reduced the risk of both bleeding and infection. It was a radical, life-saving step. The Porro operation, as it became known, was the first version of the caesarean section that offered a statistically significant hope of survival for the mother. The procedure was finally becoming a way to save two lives. The historical debate here is about the nature of medical progress. Was it a story of lone, heroic geniuses like Lister and Pasteur having eureka moments, or was it a much slower, more incremental process, built on the anonymous, forgotten work of countless practitioners over centuries? The great man theory of history is compelling, but most medical historians today argue for the latter. Doctors like Ignaz Semmelweis in Vienna had been pleading with their colleagues to simply wash their hands, proving it dramatically reduced mortality. He was ignored and ridiculed. Progress is not just about discovery, it's about the acceptance of new ideas, which often requires overcoming immense institutional inertia and professional pride. The procedure continued to be refined. Surgeons learned to make the incision in the lower, less muscular part of the uterus. Suturing techniques improved. Blood transfusions became possible. Antibiotics were discovered, providing a final, powerful weapon against infection. Each step took the procedure further and further away from the brutal act performed in your cottage. Today, in a sterile, brightly lit operating room, a woman can be given an epidural, remaining awake and aware but feeling no pain. She can watch her child being lifted into the world and hold it in her arms moments later. The surgery that was once a death sentence has become one of the most common and safest major operations in the world, a genuine medical miracle that saves hundreds of thousands of mothers and babies every year. The journey from the butcher's knife to the surgeon's scalpel was a long one, paved with the silent, forgotten stories of women like you. So here we are, at the end of this long and difficult journey. We've walked from a sunlit room full of hope, through the deepest, darkest valley of fear and pain, and have emerged into the bright, sterile light of a modern operating theater. We've seen a single procedure transform from a sacrificial ritual into a life-saving miracle. But what remains of you? What is the final echo of your story in a world that has, in so many ways, forgotten the price of its own comfort? Your story, and the stories of the countless, nameless women like you, is not just a grim piece of historical trivia. It is the foundation upon which modern safety is built. Every stitch of antiseptic procedure, every drop of anesthetic, is a silent monument to a woman who died for the lack of it. We who live in an age of medical marvels are, in a very real sense, walking on the shoulders of these forgotten dead. Our low rates of maternal mortality, a blessing we so often take for granted, were paid for in the currency of their suffering. Your sacrifice, though born of powerlessness, ultimately contributed to a world where women are no longer powerless in the same way. The horror of your experience, repeated thousands upon thousands of times, created a moral and medical imperative for change. The doctors and innovators who pushed for safer techniques were driven not just by scientific curiosity, but by the undeniable, tragic evidence of women dying in their beds. Your story became part of the data, a single point in a devastating graph that screamed for a better way. Think back to that moment decision was made for you when the Council of Men debated your fate. The core of that tragedy was your complete lack of agency. Your voice was unheard, your will was irrelevant. Today, the principles of informed consent and bodily autonomy are cornerstone ethical requirements in medicine. A patient has the right to understand the risks, to ask questions, and to make the final decision about their own body. This right, which seems so fundamental to us, was forged in the fire of experiences like yours. It is a right that was won, not granted, a direct response to a history where such rights were unimaginable. A strange, final echo of your world can still be found in the language we use. We still speak of a woman delivering a baby, as if she is a passive vessel handing over a package. But we also speak of her giving birth, a phrase that centers her own power and agency in the act. This tension in our language reflects the long historical journey from woman as passive vessel to woman as active agent in her own life story. The enduring historical debate is perhaps the most profound one: how much has truly changed? We have conquered hemorrhage, infection, and pain with science. But have we conquered the underlying societal pressures and expectations placed upon women's bodies? Historians and sociologists who study modern medicine point to ongoing debates about the rates of C-sections, about medical interventions versus natural birth, about a woman's right to choose her own birthing experience. They argue that while the tools have changed, the fundamental tension over control of the female body persists. The ghosts of the barber surgeon and the priest still linger in the corners of the most modern hospitals, in the subtle ways that a woman's choices can be influenced or overridden by medical authority or societal expectation. Your story ends in a quiet, unmarked grave in a village long gone. There is no headstone to visit, no name in a history book to look up. Your only memorial is the safety and the choices that exist today. You are the silent ancestor of every woman who has a C-section and lives to hold her child. You are the ghost in the machine of modern medicine, a constant, quiet reminder of the darkness that had to be overcome to reach the light. Your voice was silenced by a linen shroud and a brutal knife, but the echo of your story, if we listen closely enough in the quiet of the night, can still be heard. It is a whisper of gratitude for the present, and a solemn vow to never, ever forget the past. And now the story fades. The firelit cottage dissolves, the voices grow quiet, and the weight of the past gently lifts, leaving only the soft, quiet hum of the present. You are back in your own room, in your own time, safe and warm beneath the familiar comfort of your blankets. Feel the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing, the gentle tide rising and falling in the stillness of the night. The journey is over. The echoes of history are settling into the soft dust of dreams, where they can rest. Let the darkness behind your eyes feel peaceful, a soft curtain drawing closed on the day. Let your thoughts drift and soften, becoming as lightened and tethered as smoke, ready to float into the quiet landscapes of sleep. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to think about. There is only rest. The end of the article. Good night.